College football nerds here to talk a little bit about what in the world happened. South Carolina and Georgia, huge upset this weekend, and we have tried to get into some more of these recaps because they're a lot of fun. There hasn't been a lot of upsets or craziness going on, so we sort of took a break on them, but we had to talk about this. Remember, like and subscribe. Get us in the comments. Let us know. Josh, I tweeted yesterday that we were really tough on Ohio State when they got crushed by Iowa, got crushed by Purdue. Those are games you cannot lose and claim you're an elite team. And I said in that tweet, we're also going to crush Georgia because elite teams don't lose those games. But in talking to you, we were trying to compare notes before we discussed this. It sounded like you wanted to backpedal on that and put us back into a place where everybody calls us SEC homers and defends this horrible loss. Don't make a fool of me in our shared Twitter account, but I have a feeling you're about to. Give me your thoughts. Should we crush Georgia or should we let it go?
It depends on what you mean by crush them.
Crush them!
My approach with this sort of thing is, to place the team where you think they'll end up more than where they are right now. I think this loss is bad. Bad. And if they're one of a handful of one-loss teams, it's going to have to be strongly considered. Now, their strength of schedule, if you were to say, if Clemson loses a game, one, they're going to lose to a team that's as bad as South Carolina because it's all they got left. Two, they don't have anything else to prove themselves with, and Georgia has a lot of opportunities to prove themselves with big wins. But, I do think it's a terrible thing. But you'll see in my top 10, it doesn't, to me, I actually don't think it knocked them out of my top 10. And I say that only because my personal viewpoint is I think this game's a bit of an aberration. I don't think it's going to repeat itself. I think Georgia's going to win big games through the rest of the season. And because of that, I still think they're going to end up high. My difference where you were looking at the AP is I may still have them in the top 10. I'm not going to let them creep back up to 3 or 4. But, when I look at the rest of the landscape of college football, it's hard for me to put them behind like an Auburn who's floating around the top 10 range.
Yeah, but we're not talking about, in the context of what I said with Ohio State, it was that loss cost them to miss the playoffs. In my mind, I'm not saying this should cost them the playoffs, but we always talk about those losses respective to what other teams do. And you said it early, if there's other one-loss teams, this has not only got to be weighed on heavily, this has got to be weighed on massively. Yeah, yes, they might go on and win the SEC, and that's great. But let's talk about reality here. Reality, and based on what we've always said on this show, is whether or not we think Georgia's got all the talent in the world, which we're going to talk about one of the places where they don't. Tell me this, Josh. Look, does an elite team lose this kind of game ever and be a legit playoff contender? And I want to remind everybody, if you didn't get to watch the game, so South Carolina's on their backup quarterback already. Helinski's their backup quarterback. He started off really well against Georgia and got hurt. I think it was in the early second quarter. So they effectively lost to South Carolina with their third-string quarterback, and Brian Edwards didn't play most of the game. So when we're talking about playoff contenders, can you remember one that legitimately lost a game with their starting quarterback staying healthy, and still at the end of the year was a legit playoff contender?
Slightly different case, but maybe 2014 Ohio State is an example. They lost to a not great Virginia Tech team. That was not I don't think that team finished ranked. They lost at home. Weird situation, though, because of JT Barrett, because of the injury at the quarterback position. But they did have a similar sort of complete clunker offensive implosion, and that team was not only a playoff contender, but won the title. I know it's easy to say, well, of course you draw that example, quote unquote, but there's only, 5 years of playoff examples to draw from, period.
Or BCS contender. You can go further back if you want to, but the 2014 Ohio State, because I knew you were going to go there, I think that Virginia Tech team finished 8-4, and Ohio State had examples like you always like to point out. That Wisconsin game in that conference championship, they got to beat a highly ranked team 174 million to 0. So, yes, Georgia might have those opportunities, but in your mind, do they not only need to win them, but they need to absolutely rake in those opportunities? Or is the SEC so insulated that Georgia can lose to a team that Alabama just dropped half 100 on and still make it in anyway?
I think they maybe can make it in just because of the landscape of college football and how good the SEC as a whole. But really, that comes down to the fact that they're going to have to beat LSU and they're going to have to beat Alabama at the end of the season. I mean, they're going to have to win the SEC championship now. And they're not going to be the non-conference champion and get in for no other reason than there's no path for them not to win the SEC and not to have 2 losses at this point. Because for them to South Carolina is not going to win the East, which means they'd have to win out the rest of the East, which means you have to play in the championship game. And if they win the championship game, they're the champion. So they've got to win out the rest of the way in the championship game. That gives them the opportunity to win games and gives them the opportunity to beat an Alabama or presumably an LSU that's beaten South Carolina. So that beating a team that beat South Carolina kind of lets you weirdly, transitively win it. If you beat Alabama, maybe you don't get that chance if you play LSU. But I think they've still got a path. It's just the margin for error is gone, and style points are really going to matter. I think they still get in even with 1 loss, though, if they're the SEC champion. But that is now their only path.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say they might get in with 1 loss if everybody else, like the whole thing is a lot of other people gotta. If they remain undefeated, it's a little tricky. But let's talk about this game specifically and not necessarily playoff chances, because I think a team that loses to South Carolina's third-string quarterback probably is going to lose another game along the way and not win the SEC. But all that aside, in this game, one of the things we flagged preseason and absolutely got hammered by every Georgia fan on the planet was we said that a big red flag for us was the wide receivers that they were replacing. I think they were replacing their top 7 pass catchers coming into this season, and everybody killed us. Everybody said Pickens is going to be the guy, 5-star city. We're reloading, not rebuilding. And, we like to take victory laps when we take a lot of heat, and we're going to take one right now. How big of a deal was the deficiency in the wide receiver unit in this game, and do you see that getting better this season?
Deficiencies at wide receiver were a significant issue. People are putting a lot of fault on Fromm. I don't think Fromm had great options. I know, like the end of the game, people say, "Oh, he had Swift down the middle and he could have scored a touchdown." Look, guys are open for a touchdown all the time in football. The key is your first or second read open? That's the difficulty. Nobody has time to get to your 4th or 5th read. And they were not consistently open in this game. And when they were open, they made mistakes. Simmons lets the ball doink off his hands in the first overtime. You can pretty well say that might easily have cost them the game in and of itself. Pickens lets a guy jump in front of him on a route, take the ball away, and just stares at the guy as he runs it back for 6 or 7. I was really disappointed to see him just watch the DB not only take it away, but make no effort to chase him down on the play. You don't know if the quarterback's going to cut him off, and then the guy's going to have to run inside. Maybe you're going to be able to run him down. That's a lack of effort, and that's what happens when you're relying on freshmen and unproven players. Cager was their ace in the hole to a large extent. Cager and Pickens are now tied for receptions, similar yardage, but Cager had been the guy they were relying on in crunch time. He was the more polished veteran all-around receiver. The rest of the guys, you got 2 freshmen in Blaylock and Pickens. Blaylock, I think, is good, but I'm not sure that all around he's completely there yet as a big physical target. Pickens is maybe not as dominant. And then Demetrius Robertson, there's a reason Robertson's here. He's never quite somehow managed to put it all together and turn it into production. So the receiving core is an issue. I think it can and will be better when Cager's there because he's the guy they lean on. But once they lost him to injury, nobody else stepped up on that receiving core.
I don't think Georgia, defensively, I think they played a pretty good game, though I was a little concerned to see Rico Dowdle's a good running back, and he did a pretty good job against Alabama too, but I was a little concerned to see how much success, and it wasn't that much, but what success he did have against this Georgia defense just running the ball with no threat to pass whatsoever. The defense did their job of, when Helinski went down, sort of shutting that offense down. Obviously 7 points came from a pick 6, But does it concern you? There's been some concerns for the offense in general, play calling, scheme, a little bit on Fromm, a lot on wide receivers before this game. Does it concern you that once Zelensky went down, Georgia got a ton of opportunities and still wasn't able to score any points? That's the 17 they got was a late 17. I mean, it was the last drive of the game for them, other than the one that they were gifted by Muschamp. So does that concern you at all? Just overall offense, knowing what they're going to face for the rest of the year?
It does and it doesn't. And I'll tell you the two sides of this coin, and I think people can take it whichever way they want. On one hand, Georgia ran 95 plays in this game. 95 plays for 468 yards, 4.93 per. Two ways to take it. One, that's a tremendous play count to not produce many points. To only get 17 points with almost 100 plays is bad. The flip side, kind of related to it, 4.93 yards per play is not awful, but certainly not good. It's a little better than Missouri had against South Carolina when they beat them 34-14. I think the key here is when you have 468 yards of offense, you really expect to have more than 17 points. So on one hand, I am concerned with Georgia because they can shut down in another game and they can have issues. And on the other hand, I don't think you're going to see Georgia score only 17 points with 468 yards very often. This took a large amount of things going wrong. It took 4 Georgia turnovers in this game to have that much wasted production, to outgain another team by 171 yards and lose the game. I think the yard per pass at 5.7 yards per attempt is horrible. Obviously, they need to be higher than 4 yards per carry, but it's a weird flip of there's some serious concerns here on one hand, but this low scoring is not a great thing on the other. And then the final point, to mesh them together, this is why our model sort of looks at scoring unique to each team. Georgia is a more typical pro-style offense. And unlike the spread offense, these teams tend to need like 6-7 yards a game play to really work well to score. And you really saw it in this game. They can't have a 5 yard per play game, because whereas Missouri had extremely similar yardage to Georgia, they scored literally twice as many points off it. Georgia can't afford to run this kind of offense and not get better production.
And to me, that's the real canary in the coal mine. And this is why we don't use total yards. 498 yards sounds great, but when you look at the fact that they ran 95 plays, Alabama ran like 65 plays and had almost 600 yards. They were 8.8 yards per play against South Carolina. And that's with them kind of shutting it down late. So that's my concern, is not only, for me, the total yards is worthless. In this game, if you look at 498 yards, it's worthless. The fact that Jake Fromm had to throw it, I don't know, it was like 40 times or whatever, and RBU with all these 5-star future NFL running backs couldn't, and this is a good running defense. They held Alabama to 3 yards of carry, but those are my concerns long term. We don't want to go long on this. Last thing, I'm going to wrap it up. I think they lose at least one more, if not 2 games. Right now, based on what I saw with Florida, that offense is looking better. I think Florida beats Georgia, but give me, if you had to guess, gun to your head, outlook for Georgia rest of the year after what you saw Saturday, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, gun to my head. It's hard for me to see them not losing another game. You got Florida, Missouri, and Auburn, and you got them all back to back to back. And Missouri is starting to look like a really good team. Auburn, I don't think, is a bad team. I don't know. We debate on whether they're top 10, but they're top 15. That's a pretty brutal schedule. And even if they beat Florida, it's going to be easy to turn around and drop one of the next 2. 10-2 is probably what you're looking at as a Georgia fan, in my humble opinion.
And if it's 10-2 and one of those is Florida, then Florida wins the East. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for checking this one out. Let us know in the comments what you think Georgia's season is going to look like when it's all said and done. Go ahead and throw in postseason record inclusive too. So if you think they're going to make the playoffs, great. If not, let us know what you think Georgia's looking at based on the game we just saw Saturday. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.